The Bean Trees by Barbara Kingsolver. Chapter 7. How They Eat in Heaven. A red Indian thought he might eat tobacco in church. Luann had closed her eyes and put herself in a trance to dig this item out of her fourth-grade memory, the way witnesses at a holdup will get themselves hypnotized to recollect the color of the getaway car. "That's it, arithmetic," she cried, bouncing up and down. Then she said, no offense to anyone present, about the Indian. No one seemed offended. "Oh, sure, I remember those," Maddie said. "There was one for every subject. Geography was, George eats old gray rutabagas and picks his something. What would it be?" "Oh, gross," Luann said. "Gag-a-maggot." "I couldn't think of a solitary thing George might pick that started with Y. Maybe you haven't got it quite right," I told Maddie. "Maybe it's something else, like pulls his yarn." "Plants his yard?" offered Luann. "Pets his yak," said the dark, handsome man, who was half of a young couple Maddie had brought along on the picnic. Their names I had not yet gotten straight. S something and S something. The man had been an English teacher in Guatemala City. This whole conversation had started with a rhyme he used to help students remember how to pronounce English vowels. Then we'd gotten onto spelling. "What's a yak?" Luann wanted to know. "It's a type of very hairy cow," he explained. He seemed a little embarrassed. Luann and I had already told him 3 or 4 times that he spoke better English than the two of us combined. We were flattened and sprawled across the rocks like a troop of lizards stoned on the sun, feeling too good to move. Luann's feet dangled into the water. She insisted that she looked like a Sherman tank in shorts, but had ended up wearing them anyway, and a pink elastic tube top, which she'd informed us Angel called her boob tube. I'd worn jeans and regretted it. February had turned mild again right after the frost, and March was staying mainly on the sweaty end of pleasant. Luann and Maddie kept saying it had to be the warmest winter on record. The old-timers, somewhere down the line, would look back on this as the year we didn't have a winter, except for that freeze God sent on Valentine's Day, so we'd have green potato pie. When the summer wildflowers started blooming before Easter, Maddie said the Lord was clearly telling us to head for the hills and have us a picnic. You never could tell about Maddie's version of the Lord. Mainly, he was just one damn thing after another. We'd come to a place you would never expect to find in the desert, a little hideaway by a stream that had run all the way down from the mountains into a canyon, where it jumped off a boulder and broke into deep, clear pools. White rocks sloped up out of the water like giant, friendly hippo butts. A ring of cottonwood trees cooled their heels on the wet ground, and overhead leaned together, then apart, making whispery, swishing noises. It made me think of Gossip, the game we played as kids, where you whispered a message around a circle. You'd start out with "Randy walks to the hardware store," and end up with "Granny has rocks in her underwear drawer." It had been Luann's idea to come here. It was a place she said she and Angel used to go when she first came to Tucson with him. I didn't know if her choice was a good or bad sign, but she didn't seem unhappy to be here without him. She seemed more concerned that the rest of us would like it. "So is this place okay? You're sure?" she asked us, until we begged her to take our word for it that it was the most wonderful picnic spot on the face of the earth, and she relaxed. "Me and Angel actually talked about getting married up here," she said, dipping her toes in and out. There were Jesus bugs here, but not the long-legged, graceful kind we had back home. These were shaped like my car, and more or less careened around on top of the water. The whole gang of them together looked like graduation night in Volkswagen land. "That would have been a heck of a wedding," Maddie said. "A hefty hike for the guests." "Oh no, we were going to do the whole thing on horseback. Can't you just see it?" I could see it in People magazine, maybe. What with my disgust for anything horsey, I always forgot that Angel had won Luann's heart and stolen her away from Kentucky during his days as a rodeo man. Anyway, she went on, we could never have gone through with it on account of Angel's mother. She said something like, "Okay, children, go ahead. When I get thrown off a horse and bash my brains out on the rocks, just step over me and go on with the ceremony." The English teacher spoke softly in Spanish to his wife, and she smiled. Most of our conversation seemed to be getting lost in the translation, like some international form of the gossip game. But this story had come from Ms. Ruiz's Spanish. Luann claimed that the only English words her mother-in-law knew were names of diseases into English, and went back again without any trouble. A certain kind of mother is the same in any language. Esperanza and Estefan were their names. It led you to expect twins, not a young married couple, and really there was something twinnish about them. They were both small and dark, with the same high-set watching eyes and strong-boned faces I'd admired in the bars and gas stations and postcards of the Cherokee Nation. Maddie had told me that more than half the people in Guatemala were Indians. I had no idea. But where Estevan's smallness made him seem compact and springy, as though he might have steel bars inside where most people had flab and sawdust, Esperanza just seemed to have shrunk. Exactly like a wool sweater washed in hot. It seemed impossible that her hands could be so small, that all the red and blue diamonds and green birds that ran across the bosom of her small blouse had been embroidered with regular-sized needles. I had this notion that at one time in life she'd been larger, but that someone had split her in two like one of those hollow wooden dolls, finding this smaller version inside. She took up almost no space. While the rest of us talked and splashed and laughed, she sat still, a colorful outgrowth of rock. She reminded me of Turtle. There had been something of a scene between her and Turtle earlier that day. We'd driven up in 2 cars, Luann and me and the kids leading the way on my brand new retreads, and the other 3 following in Maddie's pickup. When we got to the trailhead, we parked in the skimpy shade you find under mesquite trees, like gray lace petticoats, and pulled out the coolers and bedspreads and canteens. The last 2 things out of the car were Dwayne Ray and Turtle. Esperanza was just stepping out of the cab, and when she saw the kids, she fell back against the seat, just as if she'd been hit with 28 pounds of air. For the next 10 minutes, she looked blanched, like a boiled vegetable. She couldn't take her eyes off Turtle. As we hiked up the trail, I fell in behind Estevan and made small talk. Luann was in the lead, carrying Dwayne Ray in a pouch on her back and holding his molded plastic car seat over her head like some space-age sunbonnet. Behind her, ahead of us, went Esperanza. From behind, you could have mistaken her for a schoolgirl, with her 2 long braids swinging across her back and her prim walk, one small sandal in front of the other. The orange plastic canteen on her shoulder looked like some burden thrust upon her from another world. Eventually, I asked Estefan if his wife was okay. He said certainly she was okay, but he knew what I was talking about. A little later, he said that my daughter looked like a child they'd known in Guatemala. She could be, for all I know, I laughed. I explained to him that she wasn't really my daughter. Later, while we sat on the rocks and ate bologna sandwiches, Esperanza kept watching Turtle. Estevan and I eventually decided to brave the cold water. "Don't look," I announced, and stripped off my jeans. "Taylor, no, you mustn't," Luann said. "For heaven's sake, Luann, I've got on decent underwear. No, what I mean is, you're not supposed to go in for an hour after you eat. You'll drown, both of you. It's something about the food in your stomach makes you sink." "I know I can depend on you, Luann," I said. "If we sink, you'll pull us out." I held my nose and jumped in. The water was so cold I couldn't imagine why it hadn't just stayed frozen up there on the snow-topped mountain. The 2 of us caught our breath and whooped and splashed the others until Luann was threatening our lives. Maddie, more inclined to the direct approach, was throwing rocks the size of potatoes. "If you think I'd go in there to drag either one of you out, you're off your rocker," Maddie said. Luann said, "If you all want to go and catch pneumonia, be my guest." Estevan went from whooping to singing in Spanish, hamming it up in this amazing yodely voice. He dog-paddled over to Esperanza and rested his chin on the rock by her feet, still singing, his head moving up and down with the words. What kind of words, it was easy to guess. My sweet nightingale, my rose, your eyes like the stars. He was unbelievably handsome, with this smile that could just crack your heart right down the middle. But she was off on her own somewhere. From time to time she would gaze over to where the kids were asleep on the blue bedspread, and who could blame her, really? It was a sweet sight. With the cottonwood shade rippling over them, they looked like a drawing from one of those old-fashioned children's books that show babies in underwater scenes, blowing glassy bubbles and holding on to fishes' tails. Dwayne Ray had on a huge white sailor hat and had nodded forward in his car seat, but Turtle's mouth was open to the sky. Her hair was damp and plastered down in dark cords on her temples, showing more of her forehead than usual. Even from a distance, I could see her eyes dancing around under eyelids as thin as white grape skins. Turtle always had desperate, active dreams. In sleep, it seemed, she was free to do all the things that during her waking life she could only watch. We went back at the time of evening when it's dusky, but the headlights don't really help yet. Maddie said she was stone blind this time of night, so Estevan drove. Be careful now, she warned him as the three of them climbed into the cab. The last thing we need is to get stopped. Luann and the kids and I followed in my car. Fortunately, the parking lot had a good slant to it, so getting started was a piece of cake. I hardly had time to curse, and we caught right up. Maddie needn't have worried. Estevan was a careful driver. As we puttered along, Luann had to keep reaching into the back seat, which wasn't really a seat, but a kind of pit where one used to be, to get the kids settled down. They had both slept through the entire hike back, but now were wide awake. Oh, shoot, I've sunburned the top half of my boobs, she said, frowning down her chest, stretch marks and all. Maddie's pickup stopped so fast I nearly rear-ended it. I slammed on the brakes and we all pitched forward. There was a thud in the back seat and then a sound halfway between a cough and a squeak. Jesus, that was Turtle, I said. Luann, that was her, wasn't it? She made that sound. Is her neck broken? She's fine, Taylor. Everybody's fine. Look. She picked up Turtle and showed me that she was okay. She did a somersault. I think that sound was a laugh. It must have been true. She was hanging on to Luann's boob tube for dear life and smiling. We both stared at her. Then we stared at the tailgate of the truck in front of us, stopped dead in the road. What in the tarnation? Luann asked. I said I didn't know. Then I said, look. In the road up ahead, there was a quail, the type that has one big feather sprawling out the front of its head like a 40s model lady's hat. We could just make out that she was dithering back and forth in the road, and then we gradually could see that there were a couple dozen babies running around her every which way. They looked like fuzzy ball bearings rolling around in a box. Our mouths opened and shut, and we froze where we sat. I suppose we could have honked and waved, and it wouldn't have raised any more pandemonium than this poor mother already had to deal with, but instead we held perfectly still, even Turtle. After a long minute or two, the quail got her family herded off the road into some scraggly bushes. The truck's brake lights flickered like a wink, and Estevan drove on. Something about the whole scene was trying to make tears come up in my eyes. I decided I must be about to get my period. You know, Luann said a while later, if that had been Angel, he would have given himself 2 points for every one he could hit. Knowing that Turtle's first uttered sound was a laugh brought me no end of relief. If I had dragged her halfway across the nation only to neglect and entirely botch her upbringing, would she have laughed? I thought surely not. Surely she would have bided her time while she saved up whole words, even sentences, things like, "What do you think you're doing?" I suppose some of Luann had rubbed off on me, for me to take this laugh as a sign. Luann was the one who read her horoscope every day, and mine, and Dwayne Ray's, and fretted that we would never know Turtle's true sign, which seemed to me the least of her worries, and was sworn to a strange kind of logic that said a man could leave his wife for missing a meteor shower or buying the wrong brand of cookies. If the mail came late, it meant someone, most likely Grandmother Logan, had died. But neither of us could interpret the significance of Turtle's first word. It was bean. We were in Maddie's backyard helping her put in the summer garden, which she said was way overdue considering the weather. Maddie's motto seemed to be, "Don't let the grass grow under your feet, but make sure there's something growing everywhere else." "Looky here, Turtle," I said, "we're planting a garden just like old MacDonald in your book." Maddie rolled her eyes. I think her main motive in insisting that Turtle watch us do this was to straighten the child out. She was concerned that Turtle would grow up thinking carrots grow under the rug. "Here's squash seeds," I said. "Here's pepper seeds. And here's eggplants." Turtle looked thoughtfully at the little flat discs. "That's just going to discombobble her," Maddie said. "Those seeds don't look anything like what you're saying they'll grow into. When kids are that little, they don't take much on faith." "Oh," I said. It seemed to me that Turtle had to take practically everything on faith. "Show her something that looks like what you eat." I scooped a handful of big white beans out of one of Maddie's jars. "These are beans. Remember white bean soup with ketchup? You like that." "Bean," Turtle said. "Humbean." I looked at Maddie. "Well, don't just sit there. The child's talking to you," Maddie said. I picked up Turtle and gave her a hug. "That's right, that's a bean, and you're just about the smartest kid alive," I told her. Maddie just smiled. As I planted the beans, Turtle followed me down the road, digging each one up after I planted it and putting it back in the jar. "Good girl," I said. I could see a whole new era arriving in Turtles in my life. Maddie suggested that I give her some of her own beans to play with, and I did, though Luann's warning about windpipes and golf balls was following me wherever I went these days. "These are for you to keep," I explained to Turtle. "Don't eat them. These are playing with beans. There's eating beans at home, and the rest of these in here are putting in the ground beans." Honest to God, I believe she understood that. For the next half hour, she sat quietly between two squash hills, playing with her own beans. Finally, she buried them there on the spot, where they were forgotten by all until quite a while later, when a ferocious thicket of beans came plowing up through the squashes. On the way home, Turtle pointed out to me every patch of bare dirt beside the sidewalk. "Humbean," she told me. Luann was going through a phase of cutting her own hair every other day. In a matter of weeks, it had gone from shoulder length to what she referred to as shingled, passing through several stages with figure skaters' names in between. "I don't know about shingled," I said, "but you've got to draw the line somewhere or you'll end up like this guy that comes into Maddie's all the time with a mohawk. He has 'Born to Die' tattooed on the bald part of his scalp." "I might as well just shave it off," said Luann. I don't think she was really listening. She was possessed of the type of blonde, bone-straight hair that was, for a brief period in history, the envy of every teenaged female alive. I remember when the older girls spoke so endlessly of bleaching and ironing techniques, you'd think their hair was something to be thrown in a white load of wash. Luann would have been in high school by then. She was a few years older than me, but she probably missed this whole craze. She would have been too concerned with having the wrong kind of this or that. She told me that in high school she prayed every night for glamour girl legs, which meant that you could put dimes between the knees, calves, and ankles, and they would stay put. She claimed her calves would have taken a softball. I'm certain Luann never even noticed that for one whole year her hair was utterly perfect. "It looks like it plumb died," she said, tugging on a straight lock over one eyebrow. I was tempted to remind her that anything subjected to so frequently to a pair of scissors wouldn't likely survive, but of course I didn't. I always tried to be positive with her, although I'd learned that even compliments were a kind of insult to Luann, causing her to wrinkle her face and advise me to make an appointment with an eye doctor. She despised her looks, and had more ways of saying so than anyone I'd ever known. "I ought to be shot for looking like this," she'd tell the mirror in the front hall before going out the door. "I look like I've been drugged through hell backwards," she would say on just any ordinary day. "Like death warmed over, like something the cat puked up." I wanted the mirror to talk back, to say, "Shush, you do not." But naturally, it just mouthed the same words back at her, leaving her so forlorn that I was often tempted to stick little notes on it. I thought of my T-shirt, "Turtles Now," from Kentucky Lake. Luann needed a damn I'm good mirror. On this particular night, we had invited Esperanza and Estevan over for dinner. Maddie was going to be on TV, on the 6 o'clock news, and Luann had suggested inviting them over to watch it on a television set we didn't have. She was constantly forgetting about the things Angel had taken, generously offering to loan them out, and so forth. We'd settled it, however, by also inviting some neighbors Luann knew who had a portable TV. She said she'd been meaning to have them over anyway, that they were very nice. Their names were Edna Poppy and Virgie Mae Valentine Parsons, or so their mailbox said. I hadn't met them, but before I'd moved in, she said they had kept Dwayne Ray many a time, including once when Luann had to rush Snowboots to the vet for eating a mothball. Eventually, Luann gave up on berating her hair and set up the ironing board in the kitchen. I was cooking. We had worked things out. I cooked on weekends and also on any weeknight that Luann had kept Turtle. It would be a kind of payment, and she would do the vacuuming because she'd like to, and I would wash dishes because I didn't mind them. "And on the 7th day we wash bean turds," I pronounced. Before, it had seemed picayune to get all bent out of shape organizing the household chores. Now I was beginning to see the point. The rent and utilities we split 50-50. Luann had savings left from Angel's disability insurance settlement. For some reason, he hadn't touched this money. And also, he sent checks, but only once in a blue moon. I worried about what she would do when the well ran dry, but I decided I might just as well let her run her own life. For the party, I was making sweet and sour chicken, more or less on a dare, out of one of Luann's magazines. The folks at Burger Derby should see me now, I thought. I had originally planned to make navy bean soup in celebration of Turtle's first word, but by the end of the week, she had said so many new words I couldn't have fit them all in Hungarian goulash. She seemed to have a one-track vocabulary, like Luann's hypochondriac mother-in-law, though fortunately, Turtle's ran to vegetables instead of diseases. I could just imagine a conversation between these two. Sciatica, hives, roseola, meningomalacia, Mrs. Ruiz would say in her accented English. Corn, potato, bean, Turtle would reply. What's so funny, Luann wanted to know. I hope I can even fit it into this dress. I should have tried it on first. I haven't worn it since before Dwayne Ray. I had noticed that Luann measured many things in life, besides her figure, in terms of before and after Dwayne Ray. You'll fit into it, I said. Have you weighed yourself lately? No, I don't want to know what I weigh, if the scale even goes up that high. I refuse to believe you're overweight. That's all I'm saying. If you say one more word about being fat, I'm going to stick my finger in my ears and sing Blue Bayou until you're done. She was quiet for a minute. The hiss of the steam iron and the smell of warm, damp cotton reminded me of Sunday afternoons with Mama. What's Maddie going to be on TV about? Do you know? She asked. I'm not sure. It has something to do with the people that live with her. Oh, I'd be petrified to be on TV. I know I would, Luann said. I'm afraid I would just blurt out, underpants, or something. When I was a little girl, I would get afraid in church during the invocation or some other time when it got real quiet, and and I'd all of a sudden be terrified that I was going to stand up and holler, "God's pee-pee!" I laughed. Oh, I know it sounds ridiculous. I mean, I didn't even know if God had one. In the pictures, he's always got on all those robes and things, but the fact that I even wondered about it seemed like just the ultimate sin. If I was bad enough to think it, how did I know I wasn't going to stand up and say it? "I know what you mean," I said. "There's this Catholic priest that comes to Maddie's all the time, Father William. He's real handsome. I think he's your type. Maybe not, but sometimes I get to thinking, what if I were to strut over and say something like, 'Hey, good looking, what you got cooking?'" Exactly. It's like, did you ever have this feeling when you're standing next to a cliff, say, or by an upstairs window, and you can just picture yourself jumping out? The worst time it happened to me was in high school. On our senior trip, we went to the state capitol, which is at Frankfurt. Oh, of course, you know that. What am I saying? So what happened was, you can go way up in the dome and there's only this railing, and you look down and the people are like little miniature ants, and I saw myself just hoisting my leg and going over. I just froze up. I thought, if I can think it, I might do it. My boyfriend, which at that time was Eddie Tubbs, it was way before I met on Hell, thought it was fear of heights, and I told everybody on the bus on the way home that I had acrophobia, but it was way more complicated than that. I mean, acrophobia doesn't have anything to do with being afraid you'll holler out something god-awful in church, does it? "No," I said. "I think what you mean is a totally different phobia. Fear that things you imagine will turn real." Luann was staring at me, transfixed. "You know, I think you're the first person I've ever told this to that understood what I was talking about." I shrugged. "I saw a Star Trek episode one time that was along these lines. All the women on this whole planet ended up naked. I can't remember exactly, but I think Captain Kirk gets turned into a pipe wrench." The 6 o'clock news was half over by the time we got the TV plugged in. There had been a mix-up with the women next door, who were waiting for us to come over and get the television. They didn't realize they had been invited for dinner. Meanwhile, Estevan and Esperanza arrived. Estevan played the gentleman flirt, saying how nice I looked, and didn't he perhaps know my tomboy sister who worked with a used tire firm? Exquisite was what he actually said, and tomboy, as if it were two words. I batted my eyelashes and said, yes, indeed, that she was the sister who got all the brains of the family. I suppose I did look comparatively elegant. Luann had parted my hair on the side. "What you need is one of those big, blousy white flowers behind one ear," she said, "and God, would I kill for black hair like yours." "Kill what?" I asked. "A skunk?" And forced me into a dress she had purchased before Dwayne Ray in an uptown thrift shop. It was one of those tight black satin Chinese numbers you have to try on with a girlfriend. You hold your breath while she zips you in. I only agreed to wear it because I thought sharing our clothes might shut her up about being a Sherman tank, and because it fit. But Esperanza was the one who truly looked exquisite. She wore a long, straight dress made of some amazing woven material that brought to mind the double rainbow Turtle and I saw on our first day in Tucson, twice as many colors as you ever knew existed. "Is this from Guatemala?" I asked. She nodded. She looked almost happy. "Sometimes I get homesick for Pittman, and it's as ugly as a mud stick fence," I said. "A person would have to just ache for a place where they make things as beautiful as this." Poor Luann was on the phone with Mrs. Parsons for the fourth time in 10 minutes, and apparently still hadn't gotten it straight because Mrs. Parsons and Edna walked in the front door with the TV just as Luann ran out the back to get it. One of the women led the way, and the other, who appeared to be the older of the two, carried the set by its handle, staggering a little with the weight, like a woman with an overloaded purse. I rushed to take it from her, and she seemed a little startled when the weight came up out of her hands. "Oh, my! I thought it had sprouted wings," she said. She told me she was Edna Poppy. I liked her looks. She had bobbed, snowy hair and sturdy, wiry arms, and was dressed entirely in red, all the way down to her perky patent leather shoes. "Pleased to meet you," I said. "I love your outfit. Red's my color." "Mine too," she said. Mrs. Parsons had on a churchy-looking dress and a small, flat white hat with a dusty velveteen bow. She didn't seem too friendly, but of course we were all dashing around trying to get set up. I didn't even know what channel we were looking for until Maddie's face loomed up strangely in black and white. "Signatory to the United Nations something something on human rights," Maddie was saying, "and that means we have a legal obligation to take in people whose lives are in danger." A man with a microphone clipped to his tie asked her what about legal means, and something about asylum. They were standing against a brick building with short palm trees in front. Maddie said that out of some odd 1,000 Guatemalans and Salvadorans who had applied for this, only 0.5% of them had been granted it, and those were mainly relatives of dictators, not the people running for their lives. Then the TV showed both Maddie and the interview man talking without sound, and another man's voice told us that the Immigration and Naturalization Service had returned 2 illegal aliens, a woman and her son, to their native El Salvador last week, and that Maddie claimed they had been taken into custody when they stepped off the plane in San Salvador and later were found dead in a ditch. I didn't like this man's tone. I had no idea how Maddie would know such things, but if she said it, it was so. It was. But it was all garbled anyhow. Mrs. Parsons had been talking the whole time about not being able to sit in a certain type of chair or her back would go out, and then Luann flew in the back door and called out, "Damn it, they're not home." "Oh." Mrs. Parsons made a little sniffing sound. "We're here, if you want to know." "What program did you want to see?" Edna asked. "I hope we haven't spoiled it by coming late." "That was it. We just saw it," I said, though it seemed ridiculous. 30 seconds and it was all over. "She's a friend of ours," I explained. "All I could make out was some kind of trouble with illegal aliens and dope peddlers," said Mrs. Parsons. "Dear, I need a pillow for the small of my back or I won't be able to get out of bed tomorrow. Your cat has just made dirt in the other room." I went for a cushion, and Luann rushed to put the cat out. Estefan and Esperanza, I realized, had been sitting together on the ottoman the whole time, more or less on the fringe of all the commotion. I said, "I'd like you to meet my friends." "Stephen," Esteban said, "and this is my wife, Hope." This was a new one on me. "Pleased to make your acquaintance," Edna said. Mrs. Parsons said, "And is this naked creature one of theirs? She looks like a little wild Indian." She was talking about Turtle, who was not naked, although she didn't exactly have a shirt on. "We have no children," Esteban said. Esperanza looked as though she had been slapped across the face. "She's mine," I said, "and she is a little wild Indian. As a matter of fact, why don't we start dinner?" I picked up Turtle and stalked off into the kitchen, leaving Luann to fend for herself. Why she would call this old prune-face a nice lady was beyond my mental powers. I did the last-minute cooking, which the recipe said you were supposed to do at the table in a sizzling wok before the admiring guests. A sizzling wok, my hind foot. Who did they think read those magazines? A minute later, Esperanza came into the kitchen and quietly helped set the table. I touched her arm. "I'm sorry," I said. It wasn't until everyone came in and sat down to dinner that I really had a chance to look these women over. The fact that they couldn't possibly have had time to dress up for dinner made their outfits seem to tell everything. Though, of course, Mrs. Parsons would have had time to powder her nose and reach for the little white hat. Edna even had red bobby pins in her hair, two over each ear. I couldn't imagine where you would buy such items. A drugstore, I suppose. I liked thinking about Edna, finding them there on the rack, along with the purple barrettes and Oreo cookie hair clips, and saying, "Why, look, Virgie May, red bobby pins. That's my color." Virgie May would be the type to sail past the douche aisle with her nose in the air and lecture the boy at the register for selling condoms. Estefan produced a package, which turned out to be chopsticks. There were 20 or so of them wrapped together in crackly cellophane with black Chinese letters down one side. "A gift for the dishwasher," he said, handing each of us a pair of sticks. "You use them once, then throw them away." I couldn't think how he knew we were going to have Chinese food. But then I remembered running into him a day or two ago in the leasing market, where we discussed a product called wood ears. The recipe called for them, but I had my principles. "The dishwasher thanks you," I said. I noticed Luann whisking a pair out of Dwayne Ray's reach and could hear the words "put his eyes out" as plainly as if she'd said them out loud. Dwayne Ray started squalling, and Luann excused herself to go put him to bed. "What is it? Eating sticks?" Edna ran her fingers along the thin shafts. "It sounds like a great adventure, but I'll just stick to what I know if you don't mind. Thank you all the same." I noticed that Edna ate very slowly, with gradual, exact movements of her fork. Mrs. Parsons said she wasn't game for such foolishness either. "I never said it was foolishness," Edna said. The rest of us gave it a try, spearing pieces of chicken and looping green pepper rings and chasing the rice around our plates. Even Esperanza tried. Estevan said we were being too aggressive. "They are held this way." He demonstrated, holding them like pencils in one hand and clicking the ends together. I loved his way of saying "it is" and "they are." Turtle was watching me, imitating. "Don't look at me. I'm not the expert." I pointed at Estevan. Luann came back to the table. "Where'd you learn how to do that?" she asked Estevan. "Ah," he said, "this is why I like chopsticks. I work in a Chinese restaurant. I am the dishwasher." "I didn't know that. How long have you worked there?" I asked, realizing that I had no business thinking I knew everything about Estevan. His whole life really was a mystery to me. "1 month," he said. "I work with a very kind family who speak only Chinese. Only the 5-year-old daughter speaks English. The father has her explain to me what I must do. Fortunately, she is very patient." Mrs. Parsons muttered that she thought this was a disgrace. "Before you knew it, the whole world will be here gibbering and jabbering till we won't know it's America." "Virgie, mind your manners," Edna said. "Well, it's the truth. They ought to stay put in their own dirt, not come here taking up jobs." "Virgie," Edna said. I felt like I'd sat on a bee. If Mama hadn't brought me up to do better, I think I would have told that old snake to put down her fork and get her backside out the door. I wanted to scream at her. "This man you are looking at is an English teacher. He did not come here so he could wash Egg Foo Young off plates and take orders from a 5-year-old. But Estevan didn't seem perturbed, and I realized he must hear this kind of thing every day of his life. I wondered how he could stay so calm. I would have murdered somebody by now, I thought. Would have put a chopstick to one of the many deadly uses that only Luann could imagine for it. "Can I get anybody anything?" Luann asked. "We're fine," Edna said, obviously accustomed to being Virgie May's public relations department. "You children have made a delightful meal." Esperanza pointed at Turtle. It was the first time I ever saw her smile, and I was struck with what a lovely woman she was when you really connected. Then the smile left her again. Turtle, wielding a chopstick in each hand, had managed to pick up a chunk of pineapple. Little by little she moved it upward toward her wide-open mouth, but the sticks were longer than her arms. The pineapple hung in the air over her head and then fell behind her onto the floor. We laughed and cheered her on, but Turtle was so startled she cried. I picked her up and held her on my lap. "Tortolita, let me tell you a story," Estevan said. "This is a South American, wild Indian story about heaven and hell." Mrs. Parsons made a prudish face, and Estevan went on. "If you go to visit hell, you will see a room like this kitchen. There is a pot of delicious stew on the table with the most delicate aroma you can imagine. All around people sit, like us. Only they are dying of starvation. They are gibbering and jabbering." He looked extra hard at Mrs. Parsons. "But they cannot get a bite of this wonderful stew God has made for them." "Now, why is that?" "Because they're choking for all eternity?" Luann asked. Hell for Luann would naturally be a place filled with sharp objects and small round foods. "No," he said. "Good guess, but no. They are starving because they only have spoons with very long handles, as long as that." He pointed to the mop, which I had forgotten to put away. "With these ridiculous, terrible spoons, the people in hell can reach into the pot, but they cannot put the food in their mouths. Oh, how hungry they are! Oh, how they swear and curse each other, he said, looking again at Virgie. He was enjoying this. Now, he went on, you can go and visit heaven. What? You see a room just like the first one, the same table, the same pot of stew, the same spoons as long as a sponge mop. But these people are all happy and fat. Real fat, or do you mean just well-fed? Luann asked. Just well-fed, he said. Perfectly, magnificently well-fed, and very happy. Why do you think? He pinched up a chunk of pineapple in his chopstick, neat as you please, and reached all the way across the table to offer it to Turtle. She took it like a newborn bird.